Most everyone will recognize the vehicle that I'm showing here. Of course, it's a 1965 model year Mustang. And the 1965 model year Mustangs came out beginning in April of 1964, so it was a bit of an elongated model year. But Ford was hugely successful with this first pony car. You can see for obvious reasons why they became called pony cars, the Mustang, Pony, etc. But Ford sold 400,000 of these Mustangs in its first model year. And after just a few model years, the Mustang had already passed 1 million units in sales. So it was tremendously successful. Now, one of the beautiful things about the 65 Mustang is that front end with the large kind of gaping mouth grille and that large Mustang right in the middle of it. Notice that there's no badging that says Mustang on the front of the car. There is badging, the block letters that spell out Ford on the top there. But the Mustang logo kind of stands on its own in the middle of the grille as a symbol that really helps connote the overall brand name. Now, the Mustang, of course, was so successful that it spawned numerous copycats from other companies and, well, as we're going to see, from other Ford divisions. But, of course, Chevrolet introduced its Camaro as well as the Pontiac Firebird for 1967. AMC would launch its Javelin in 1968. And, to be fair, Plymouth's Barracuda with that big glass back had kind of come out at the same time as the Mustang in early 1964. But I would say the Mustang certainly was the car that captured the hearts and minds of more of the buying public if I had to pick between the two of those vehicles. But of course, with all that success of the Mustang, some other divisions within Ford got a little bit jealous. More specifically, the Lincoln Mercury division wanted an answer of its own to the Mustang, but they didn't really know what they wanted at first. There are actually a couple different proposals that were evaluated when it came to Lincoln Mercury's response to the Mustang. One was basically a Thunderbird clone for Mercury division. So would have been larger and more expensive, and it would have been high-styled as well. But that was obviously rejected. Then there was a thought that, well, you could just badge engineer a Mustang. Just take it and put a Mercury badge on it and some nameplate. And that was rejected as well. Most people don't necessarily know that the Cougar was, in fact, relatively different from the Mustang in its final form. As an example, the two cars don't have the same wheelbases or overall lengths. Most people know that the Cougar is certainly more plush than the Mustang. But the wheelbase on that 1967 Mustang, for example, was 108 inches. On the Mercury Cougar, it was 111.2. And on the Ford Thunderbird, it was 114.5. So it kind of slotted in between the Mustang and the Thunderbird. The same was true for overall length. The Mustang for 1967 measured 183.6 inches, the Cougar 190.3, and the Thunderbird 206.9 inches. So again, it really ended up being slotted right between the Mustang and the Thunderbird, and you got not just a badge-engineered Mustang, but you really did get a Mustang that was longer, a bit more plush, and had some unique features to Mercury. Of course, we all know by now that electric blade razor thing type grille was certainly unique to Mercury, as well as the hidden headlights. You didn't get those on the Mustang. You just got kind of the standard sealed beam exposed headlamps up front. But Mercury went with this beautiful execution of the thin bladed grille up front, and it gave the car a unique look that was all its own and so different from that gaping mouth Mustang grille up front. But the body side sheet metal was also different. Notice that the Cougar doesn't have that, I'll call it kind of fake scoop that the Mustang had in front of the rear wheel that ran pretty much most of the length of the car. Here you have a very clean body side with this convex surface that's very unbroken, except for this character line that begins at the front bumper and goes over the front wheel, then goes over the rear wheel, and terminates at the end of the car. And I'm left wondering a bit. Ford certainly had some spies and knew what Oldsmobile was doing with their Tornado during this time frame. In fact, there are some photos of Ford Thunderbird mock-ups that look like a Tornado. That was because Ford knew what Oldsmobile was doing. It wasn't because they came up with that theme on their own first. But there's a little Tornado, at least in my eye, on the side of this Mustang, although it certainly isn't as pronounced as the Tornado was in terms of the wheel arches or that character line itself. And then, of course, out back, you got this beautiful repeat of the theme from the front end. This is obviously a Cougar XR7 as well. You can tell by, well, the license plate, among other things. But it has this repeat of that thin electric razor or electric shaver type front end here in the taillights. Just beautifully done. And the great thing about these taillights was that they were sequential, so they would blink in sequence, similar to the Thunderbird of the era. So the Cougar, at least in my eye, was just a beautifully done, beautifully executed vehicle, and it delivered on what Lincoln Mercury product planners and leadership wanted. It was longer, as I mentioned, than the Mustang. The overall length was bigger, almost 7 inches bigger. It was actually heavier, too, by about 200 pounds. And it appears that some members of the press were at least taken with the new 1967 Cougar. Motor Trend gave it its Car of the Year award for that particular model year. Although there are some Cars of the Year from Ford and from GM and from, well, basically everybody that maybe shouldn't have been Cars of the Year. But in any case, it was Car of the Year for Motor Trend in 1967. Now, one humorous element associated with this first-year Cougar was that Mercury had an interesting, clearly chauvinistic ad campaign for 1967. Here's the brochure cover, 1967 Mercury, the man's car. No, I didn't make that up. That was what they went with for 1967 only. And I wonder if one of the reasons why they ended up dropping it after just 1 year was because, well, the Cougar, which you can see here on the left on the front of this particular brochure, proved popular not only with men but also with women. And so you don't want to just alienate half of your potential buying base. So that slogan got dropped after 1967. I do like that there's the two new vehicles here for Mercury that are on the cover, the Cougar on the left and then the 1967 Marquis, another personal favorite of mine on the right. Now, under hood in your Cougar, you could get a number of different engines. Here you can see a small block Ford. More specifically, the standard engine in the Cougar was a 289 cubic inch Windsor V8 that made 200 horsepower and breathed through a 2-barrel carburetor. This was the same engine that you could get in a Mustang at this time. But you could also get more performance. There was a 4-barrel version of that engine that made 225 horsepower. And if you really wanted something hot, you could get the Marauder GT 390 cubic inch 4-barrel carburetor equipped V8 that made 320 horsepower. So there were a whole bunch of different elements to the Cougar that made it successful, not only its style, but also pretty wide range of powertrain choices. And I have to say that while 200 horsepower from the 289 2-barrel doesn't sound like a lot, that engine, if you've driven a car with a 289 or even a 302, they are just sweet little engines. They have great torque. They may not be the fastest, but they are so smooth and quiet, and they push this 3,100-pound car around just absolutely effortlessly. It's a beautiful, beautiful engine. I love my 390s, but I got to tell you, the 289s and the 302s, they are some sweet little sewing machine engines too. Now, when it came to the interior of your Cougar, you did get quite a few standard Ford parts in this overall interior, but bucket seats were standard in the Cougar. Of course, the XR7 really jazzed up the Cougar partway through that first model year. And when you got the XR7, you not only got these bucket seats with this large center console, but you also got a little mini overhead console that was borrowed from the Thunderbird that had some courtesy lights and reminder lights. And then you did get the competition gauge packages that showed the RPM as well as coolant temperature and other elements, map pockets, door pull straps, this wood grain steering wheel applique and dash applique that you see here. And of course, you got, like all 1967 Ford products, the flower pot wheel. But here, at least it looked good in its 3-spoke design. And just to give you a sense of how that XR7 interior compares to the standard Cougar interior, here's the standard interior. Notice the door panels are different. They don't have the little pull straps. There's not that full center console in here. There's not an overhead console. Different seats to some degree. So quite a few differences between the XR7. And the other thing that you could get that really kind of souped up your Cougar was the GT Performance Package. That was something that if you ordered it, you got the 390 V8, low restriction dual exhaust, and special handling suspension that gave you heavier duty front and rear springs and shocks and larger stabilizer bars. So that was something that was also quite special, were the Cougars with the GT package. And of course, you also did get front disc brakes and a quick ratio power steering. So how then did the Cougar fare in the marketplace? Well, for 1967, Lincoln Mercury division sold about 151,000 1967 Cougars, and that included 27,000 XR7s. So it was quite a popular trim package on the Cougars, and 7,400 GTs. So overall, it was a pretty successful automobile. And just to give you a sense, at the time, it really exceeded Ford Motor Company's projections. Lincoln Mercury division thought they were only going to sell about 60,000 of these at the time, but obviously their sales far exceeded that. Now, in closing, I did want to talk a little bit about the feature that you see here that was on the passenger side headlamp door for the 1967 Cougars, and that is the Cougar logo, or the cat. Remember, Mercury used to call the Lincoln Mercury dealers the sign of the cat. That's where you could find your Cougar. So you got the cat, and then you had this block lettering that said Cougar underneath it. Why in the world was that? Remember that the Ford Mustang just had that grille with the Mustang in it. It didn't say Mustang on the front end itself. But here, for whatever reason, Mercury chose to put Cougar underneath that cat logo. And there is a reason for that. That is because Jaguar sued Ford over the logo. They thought it was too close to their typical Jaguar Leaper logo, if you will, and they won. They actually won in court. It looked too similar. So to appease Jaguar, and obviously the court in the case of this decision, Ford decided to put Cougar in block lettering underneath the cat logo to make sure that everybody knew it was a Cougar and not a Jaguar. That is 100% truthful in terms of why that lettering is there. And I think it just goes to show you that sometimes, you can't make this stuff up. Who would have thought that Jaguar would be, let's say, sensitive that somebody would confuse their vehicle with a Mercury? But hey, it's true. They sued Ford, they won, and that's why you see the block lettering underneath that Cougar emblem on these 1967 Cougars. Now, over time, similar to the Mustang, the Cougar would end up getting bloated and a bit pudgier. I actually like the second-generation Mustang. Not a huge fan of the styling on this 1971 Cougar, though. Although some people like it, it's not offensive. But I just think that the original Cougar that came out for the 1967 model year was just so pure, so beautiful, and also appropriately differentiated from the Ford Mustang that it's really no secret why Lincoln Mercury was able to sell 151,000 of these vehicles compared to the 60,000 that they had projected. It was kind of the right car for the right time and the right place at the right price point, and it was what buyers were looking for. You didn't necessarily want just the average run-of-the-mill pony car with the Mustang. Some buyers wanted something a bit more elegant. And if you wanted to be super elegant, you could get the XR7 package. And if you wanted to be sporty, you could get the GT package. So there were a lot of options that you could get on these Cougars, and that really helped drive and propel their sales for a number of years to come. And while in 1967, the Cougar would have the 390 cubic inch V8 that I mentioned before that made 320 horsepower as its top engine option, 1968 would bring a whole new level of spirited performance to the Cougar, with both the 428 and the 427 making 335 and 390 horsepower respectively being available under hood. But we're going to save those as a story for another day. Hope you enjoyed this spotlight on the 1967 Cougar. Thanks again for watching.